Heath, you want to give me two of your favorite sleepers as of right now, April 1st?
Yeah, and just to get this out of the way, so like, how are you defining a sleeper? I went and looked at our most recent mock draft and looked for guys who were taken after pick 100. So guys who I think are going to be better than that. And the one who stood out the most, and maybe it's unfair because it's at the quarterback position, but Kyler Murray. I still believe that Kyler Murray could be a top 5 fantasy quarterback, especially if he gets Marvin Harrison Jr. and he gets back to running the way that he was. This is a guy who could rush for 800, 900 yards, throw for 4,000. We've seen that type of upside before, and might have one of the best wide receivers in the NFL on his team in just about, a month and a half, or just a little less than a month. And then number 2, you mentioned him, I would say Keaton Mitchell. On that Devon Achane strand. He's moved down a little bit because of the arrival of Derrick Henry, but still the incredible upside, those backs that can take, and we saw Kamara do this early in his career, can take 15 touches a game, and they're so efficient that they could turn that into top 12 production. I do think Mitchell is that type of back. It might be a second half type of the season, but we saw Breece Hall was basically an RB1 after the first month of the season coming off the ACL, so it's not impossible.
Right, Keith Mitchell with the ACL injury that was in December, so a late injury for him. And Kyler Murray, it's weird. It's like, is anybody going to have the guts? Not you, but in the entire industry, is anybody going to rank Kyler Murray as a top 6 quarterback? I mean, I think maybe after the NFL draft, but he's shown that he can be that, as you said, Heath. Yeah.
It's gotten easier because we're less excited about Trevor Lawrence. Justin Herbert fell behind him. Like, it might just take a couple more guys moving down. But no, he won't be a sleeper anymore if we start ranking him as a top 6 quarterback. The beauty of Kyler Murray right now is the top 5 upside, maybe even top 3 upside at the cost of QB 10.
Right. To rank him top 6, you have to value him more than either one of Dak Prescott or Joe Burrow, which isn't happening. I don't think he's going to get drafted ahead of CJ Stroud. And then I think he's in that mix fairly so with Anthony Richardson, Brock Purdy, Jordan Love. So that's, I think, where he's going to live. Top 10.
Well, I don't think he's going to go ahead of Burrow, but you think Dak Prescott is in the public's perception?
And he's not going to go ahead of Burrow, but it's not unjust. Like, would I be surprised if Kyler Murray had a better season than Joe Burrow next year? Not really.
No.
Right. I mean, there's definitely the potential for it to happen. But I'm talking about being drafted. I don't think he's getting drafted ahead of those guys.
Yeah. So Kyler, for basically, he's another guy where he's had these partial games, including one game he played 3 snaps towards ACL, and it really hurts his per game finish. But for 2020, I believe it was, I think it was 2020, the first 9 games of the year, he was the number 1 quarterback in fantasy. Then he sprained his AC joint and his season went south. And he's been, for full seasons, he's had 2 years where he's finished as a top 7 guy. But anyway, when he's had a great receiver, he's just been phenomenal. But let me paint this scenario. We'll move on from Kyler after this. They got the 4th pick in the draft. So many people have been saying for so long, Marvin Harrison to the Cardinals. What if they trade out from there? And what if they don't end up with one of the top 3 receivers? What if it's Brian Thomas or something like that instead of Harrison, Odunze, Neighbors for the Arizona Cardinals? Would you he'd still be a sleeper, but would you think he'd still have top 5 upside, Kyler?
Yes, because he still has, in my opinion, an elite playmaker at a thin position in Trey McBride. And I do think that the thing about this draft class is, yes, it's top heavy at wide receiver, but it's very deep at receiver. And so are we going to see, and you can make all the jokes you want, a Tank Dell, a Puka Nacua, somebody to that level? No, it's hard to expect that. But we also, we had a draft class a few years ago where, think about where Brandon Ayuk and Justin Jefferson were drafted, back end of the first round, so it doesn't necessarily have to be the first guy or 2 coming off the board to be the best of the group. And so you mentioned one in Thomas, there's going to be, a handful of others that go in the second round. And so they may end up with 2 of those guys, especially depending on the draft capital that comes back to them in the trade that they make. So they may trade down and still get Odunze. They may trade down and get Thomas. They may trade down, miss out on what everybody's considering, the 1 and the 1A if you want to put it in that category of Harrison and Neighbors. And they still may have a very good receiving core. We spent the time with Jake Seeley, and I agree. Michael Wolf, intrigue. Greg Dortch will make plays. Trey McBride obviously will make plays. He'll make plays with his legs. And so I'm not going to view Kyler. I'm not going to drop Kyler because he doesn't get one of the top 2 or 3 guys. I'm only going to like him that much more.
Will Levis is a sleeper for you. Did you even consider drafting him in a 1 quarterback league? He did not get drafted in the draft I'm looking at.
Yeah, he's I would consider drafting him in a 1 quarterback league if I waited until the double-digit rounds and ended up with Kyler Murray or somebody like that. What happens almost always in our mock drafts is we get to round 4 or 5 and one of Mahomes or Lamar or Allen's available still, and so I just take them. But yeah, if I had waited at quarterback and I was taking 2, I think he's the type of guy with the gunslinger mentality and the combination of Ridley and Hopkins and the rushing touchdown potential for not like huge upside, but some upside that could sneak into the bottom half of the top 12. So I do like pairing him up with another guy outside of the top 20. He's my number. I think he's my QB 17 right now.
Will Levis. Yeah.
I almost think it's almost beneficial to do it no matter what kind of quarterback you take, unless it's an injury-prone guy and that's the second quarterback you're looking at. But you could still take a Mahomes or Allen type of quarterback, and if Will Levis hits, depending on how your league is with trades, like he could have a lot of trade value, if he starts to become that guy. And, we saw the upside in the 1 game against Atlanta last year when, DeAndre Hopkins went nuts. You throw in the receiving core that they have, maybe a suspect run game, but an improved offensive line and play caller and all those things. There's a lot to love about Will Levis. So, yeah, I totally agree.
All right, we got Shuba Hubbard and Keaton Mitchell at running back. Are you buying the idea that Shuba Hubbard could just be their starting running back all year?
Not in a clear number 1, but in a 1A role, I think it's certainly possible. We'll find out more after the draft, of course, but and it's also you can put Miles Sanders on this list and he's going later. So because it is a new coaching staff and we've seen that running back situations can change even if the same 2 guys are there when the coaching changes. But yeah, I think it's possible that Shuba Hubbard could have 220 touches next year.
So I asked Dave Canales at the owners' meetings about his running backs. And when he talked about Hubbard, he said, it's on the site. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it was something to the effect of he has the running style that we love or like or something like that. But he did say that he's looking forward to getting his hands on both the guys, Sanders and Hubbard, and seeing how it's going to work. And I said, do you have any idea of potential workload? And the first thing he said was competition. So I think he's going to let it play out. Obviously, Hubbard was, not significantly better, but from a fantasy points per game, they're almost double of what Sanders did a year ago. And so you would think he gets the opportunity to be the starter going in, even though Sanders was the one they paid last season. So I almost think they both fall in this category because, this is one of those, as you used the phrase with Ben Gresh last week, ambiguous backfields where, you can draft potentially both guys with, Hubbard should go, I would say maybe as early as round 8, but potentially double-digit rounds as well. Sanders is definitely going to be one of those late-round picks because everybody was pissed off after what happened a year ago. And it's going to be an improved offense, an improved offensive line. You may not get one guy standing out significantly above the other because they'll probably mix and match them. But, an injury occurs and then you have, a borderline RB2 or maybe just a high-end flex. But there's a lot to like about, getting both these guys just in a refresh situation.
Okay. And at receiver, we've got Curtis Samuel. Sorry, just finishing my running back note there. All right, you got Curtis Samuel and Demario Douglas for wide receiver here. And what do you think about these guys? Do they have any upside? Or are we just looking at bye-week replacement type of players?
Well, they have huge relative to where they're going to be drafted. We've seen a second wide receiver function as a borderline number 2 in the Bills offense, and we saw some problems with Stephon Diggs down the stretch last year. We don't know who the Bills are going to add as their wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 2, and Samuel will be the wide receiver 3, but he has a really special skill set after the catch. And so if they put him into that Cole Beasley type role, I think he could do more with those catches, with those catches if he can stay healthy.
Jamie, you've been a big Khalil Shakir guy. So how much does Curtis Samuel affect that for you? It seems like my perception is that it's bothering other people more than it's bothering you in terms of
Yeah, I want to
Shakir?
see what happens in camp. I mean, the relationship with Joe Brady is not exactly the most encouraging thing, and Brandon Beane, the GM, also has a history with Curtis Samuel, so there's familiarity there. But I still think that they're not going to forget about Khalil Shakir, and so we'll see. Like he said, are they going to bring in another receiver, via the draft? Are they still going to maybe explore trade? Because I don't think they have their long-term number one guy on the roster right now, because Stephon Diggs clearly is not going to be there, maybe even after the season. So do they get very aggressive and maybe try and swing a big trade, let's say for T. Higgins? But most likely the receiving core is going to look like it looks right now, with the addition of, maybe a high-profile rookie, maybe more of a, second or third tier type of guy. But they're also very invested in their tight end group. That's something that Sean McDermott talked about when he was asked about his receiving core. He said, I'm putting Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox in that room of the receiving core. So in terms of the pecking order for targets, I would hope, because I think we all have a lot more invested in Kincaid, that Kincaid's 2, and then the tight ends, and then the rest of the receiving core kind of shakes itself out. So I'm not going to necessarily rule out that Samuel is automatically better than Khalil Shakir entering his 3rd season, coming off a strong finish, caught everything that was thrown to him. So Josh Allen has to have some sort of, love for what that kid was able to accomplish. And so we'll see how it all sort of breaks down. But yes, Curtis Samuel coming is a damper on the ceiling for Shakir, and certainly, takes it from an easy guy to target with a late round pick to more of a, okay, I'll take a chance on one of the 2 guys and see how it sort of plays out.
Would you guys rather have Curtis Samuel, Demario Douglas, or a guy who's on Jamie's sleepers list and who Jake Seeley talked about last week, Josh Downs for the Colts?
Depending on what the Patriots do, it would be Douglas, Downs, Bills guy.
I think that probably sounds right. Yeah.
What is it that
New
you like
England's receiving core right now is awful.
So I was going to say, what is it you like about Demario Douglas over Downs? Just opportunity?
He could be the number 1 wide receiver on his team. And we don't exactly know what the Patriots are going to do, but it sure seems like they'd like to keep doing what they've been doing. So I do think there's a potential that he's like that prototypical Patriots slot wide receiver that just sees an enormous target share because they don't really have anybody else to throw to. Now, they do like Kendrick Bourne also, and so maybe Kendrick Bourne out targets him, but I'd rather bet on the young guy. And Douglas looked pretty good in the second half of last season. So he probably is a guy that turns into more of a number 3 unless he happens to score touchdowns. But they could be in a position to add a good rookie quarterback, and this offense could be much improved from last year.
That's the thing. It's like, what's the game plan at receiver for them? And they, Jerron Mayo talked about this. He's like, they kind of whiffed on free agency. He said it was important to them to bring back, some guys that were, their own free agents, so Kendrick Bourne, Hunter Henry, that was seemingly a priority to keep those guys on the roster. But, unless they decide to go with, Jacoby Brissett and maybe trade back into the back end of the first round, or hoping that they can get a Bo Nix if they do decide to take a receiver at 4 and surprise us a little bit, as opposed to taking the quarterback there, or 3, taking the quarterback there, then we could be looking at a much better receiving core, but just a terrible quarterback situation. It's not that Jacoby Brissett won't be good for whatever fantasy options there, because we've seen that at times during his career. But obviously, I think the best case scenario, if you're in the Demario Douglas camp, is draft a quarterback, don't spend a lot of capital at wide receiver, and then Douglas does have the chance to sort of become this guy, as Heath talked about.
Yeah, I think the best case scenario is that Washington takes McCarthy or Jaden Daniels, and you get Drake May with no significant competition out at wide receiver. And then I think it could be like maybe he does have borderline top 24 upside.